Welcome to the Nebraska Department of Education Nutrition Services Training on Meal Modifications in the School Meals Programs. The first part of this presentation will consist of meal modification training, and the last part of the training will provide resources that you may find helpful when making special diet accommodations. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or give me a call. All of my contact information will be shown at the end of this presentation. My name is Jessica Fermansky, and I am a registered dietitian and a program specialist with Nutrition Services. On this slide, you will find my email if you should ever need to contact me with questions about meal modification requests. During this training, I will define several common terms and phrases. We will then explore federal laws and policies with recent updates. I will discuss in detail two different documents to be used for requesting meal modifications. These include the request for meal accommodation and the medical statement forms. These have been developed by the Nebraska Department of Education Nutrition Services. I will also spend some time describing common requests and the appropriate actions for each. Before getting into the details of policy and law, it is important to understand why accommodating meals is significant. As food service professionals, you want to feed students nutritious and well-balanced meals so they may succeed in school, ensure the safety and health of each and every student, and ultimately provide an equal opportunity for students to participate in the school meals programs. Although we will focus on the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program, the information in this presentation also applies to the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, FFVP, the Special Milk Program, SMP, the After School Snack component of the NSLP, as well as the Seamless Summer Option, SSO. The main reason why we need to know how to accommodate for meal modifications is to comply with the USDA regulations and their non-discrimination policies, and also because we want all children that need these meal modifications to be able to receive them and benefit from the lunch and breakfast programs. We have established that making meal modifications is very important for the success and health of a student, but what parameters do we have to make those accommodations? This is where the law, policy, and federal guidance comes in. The three most recent pieces of guidance have been published in 2016 and 2017. These publications play a large role in how SFAs can accommodate for meal modification requests. With each publication that's come out, more clarification has been made and updates have been included. The first piece of guidance is called SP 59-2016, also known as the Policy Memorandum on Modifications to Accommodate Disabilities in the School Meal Programs. This memo incorporated the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as ADA's, definition of disabilities, indicating that SFAs should make reasonable meal accommodations at no extra charge for the students with restrictive or modified diets. The second piece of guidance is called SP 26-2017, also known as Accommodating Disabilities in the School Meal Programs, Guidance and Questions and Answers, Q&As. This is a Q&A covering common questions that were raised following the release of SP 59-2016. It answers questions on how to ensure all students have access to the school meal programs. Accommodating children with disabilities in the school meals programs, Guidance for School Food Service Professionals, is the third and last piece of guidance I will mention. It was released July 25th, 2017, and is meant to supplement SP 59-2016 and SP 26-2017. At the very end of this guidance manual, there is a thorough list of additional outside resources that may be helpful to you. Each of these 3 documents are great resources if you have specific questions for certain meal modifications. I recommend everyone read through the new 2017 guidance as it answers many questions and emphasizes recent updates. I am briefly going to outline the main points here. The first main point is an emphasis being put on SFAs notifying families of the process for requesting meal modifications, and also identifying the responsible individual at the school for receiving this information. Schools may post notices in school publications, in radio announcements, and other relevant forms of media. The second main point focuses on the definition of disability. Policy memos prior to the 2017 guidance focused on accommodating for students that had a life-threatening disability. But the definition of disability has been expanded and no longer needs to be life-threatening in order for SFAs to make modifications. It is expected that most requests be accommodated as long as the need is based on a mental or physical impairment. When it comes to meal modification requests, there is some language to familiarize yourself with. Over the next few slides, I will be discussing these 5 terms and phrases found on this slide. The first term is disability. Disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. With this expanded definition, more meal accommodations can be made. Even episodic disabilities or those that occur occasionally and at irregular intervals are considered disabilities. The definition of disability talks about major life activities, but what does that entail? A major life activity may include anything that limits a person from taking care of oneself or alters how someone can see, hear, speak, learn, read, think, etc. A major life activity also includes anything that limits bodily functions, such as the immune, digestive, or endocrine systems, as well as other systems listed on this slide. Although this slide includes many major ways that life activities may be impacted, the list is not all-inclusive. There may be other major life activities that are not on this list, and because of this, you are encouraged to assess each situation as a unique request. Another common phrase to familiarize yourself with is food intolerance. Food intolerance is an abnormal response to a component of a food that does not involve an immune system reaction. In other words, a food intolerance is not life-threatening, but commonly causes discomfort, especially with the digestive system. If symptomatic foods are eaten, this person may experience abdominal pain, bloating, gas, or diarrhea. The most common types of intolerances you may encounter revolve around gluten and lactose. Gluten intolerances have to do with the consumption of wheat, barley, or rye. Lactose intolerances have to do with the consumption of dairy products. Next up is food allergy. A food allergy is an immune system reaction to a component of a food, at times producing a life-threatening response. This means that the body's response to an allergen may be life-threatening, but not necessarily always. Whether the allergen is life-threatening or not, it is of the utmost importance to keep students safe and healthy. About 90% of all food allergies fall within what's called the Big Nine. The Big Nine includes allergens such as peanuts, tree nuts, or walnuts, almonds, pecans, cashews, etc., milk, eggs, wheat, soy, fish, such as tuna, carp, salmon, cod, and shellfish, such as shrimp, crab, and lobster. In 2021, sesame was also added to the list. All of these allergens can be found in many other forms or under different names. It is important to know all the forms and names of an allergen because even the smallest amounts can cause an allergic reaction. Although a majority of food allergies fall within these 9 categories, food allergies are not limited to this list. You may potentially come across food allergies to kiwi, beef, corn, certain spices, among many, many other types of food. If someone is exposed to an allergen, they may experience adverse health effects. The person may develop hives, itching, or skin rashes, experience swelling of the lips, face, tongue, or throat. They may start wheezing, develop nasal congestion, or experience trouble breathing, develop abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, and/or vomiting. They may also become dizzy, lightheaded, or faint. A person with a food allergy will likely experience several of the above symptoms and potentially other symptoms that are not listed here. Be sure to communicate with the household and other school staff so everyone knows what to expect and the correct actions to take if a reaction should occur. Although it is important to know the signs and symptoms of an allergic reaction, the best defense is to prevent the allergic reaction from occurring in the first place. In order to prevent adverse reactions, there are many proactive things you can do. First, you should know each student and understand what their exact needs are. If you feel a meal modification request is unclear, be sure to reach out to the household and/or the school nurse to try to clear up any confusion. Having a strong understanding of a student's situation is essential for preparing foods that will not trigger a reaction. Schools are encouraged to use standardized recipes. If you are using standardized recipes, you ensure that the same ingredients and amounts are being used every time the recipe is made. This can prevent any unexpected ingredients from making it into the food. Another important piece of safety is to prevent cross-contamination through good food safety practices. This will help prevent food allergens from crossing from one food to the next. This will also help prevent the spread of any illnesses that potentially could be carried by food, which protect the entire student population. It is important to be willing to work with others. Call the household if clarification about the diet is needed. Discuss the student's meal plan with your coworkers in the kitchen. Reach out to the school nurse. Open communication between individuals is important in keeping a student safe and healthy. And finally, know how to read nutrition facts labels. Be familiar with the setup of a label and what items and terms to look for. If you are unsure if a food item contains a specific allergen or not, it is your responsibility to contact your distributor or the manufacturer to make that determination. Being proactive with nutrition facts labels will help prevent you from ordering foods that contain an allergen. If you are looking for more information on reading food labels, you can click on or type the following link into your web browser. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has detailed information and resources to help. The next common phrase is celiac disease. Celiac disease is the immune reaction from gluten that occurs in the small intestine, causing abdominal pain, bloating, or diarrhea. Although this reaction sounds similar to an allergy, it is something different. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease that causes damage in the small intestine and prevents the person from absorbing nutrients effectively. It is essential that these individuals avoid gluten-containing grains such as wheat, barley, and rye, which is the same treatment for gluten intolerance. By avoiding these grains, we can make sure that the student is healthy, safe, and is absorbing important nutrients. Peanut allergies are a fairly common food modification request. Because this allergy is so common, some schools have decided to create peanut-safe tables in the lunchroom and have even gone as far as making the entire school peanut-safe. Be careful what verbiage you use in your SFA if you would like to go this route. You cannot have a truly peanut-free table or school. The SFA can ensure the products going through the kitchen are peanut-free, but we cannot ensure that all outside food coming into the SFA is absolutely peanut-free. Thus, the SFA can advertise as peanut-safe, but not peanut-free. Food bans, in addition, can create a false sense of security. The results of a 5-year study titled New Guidelines for Schools Recommended Against Food Bans, sponsored by McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, and published in 2021 in the Journal of Clinical Immunology, makes it clear food allergies present a serious, sometimes life-threatening health risk, but schools are overall safer with healthier practices when they rely on proper training and protocol rather than food bans. A ban on common allergens does not necessarily make a school cafeteria any safer. Creating, implementing, and following a comprehensive plan is far more effective approach. Here are 4 elements that are essential in keeping children with food allergies safe in your cafeteria. Implement proper emergency training. All adults, including the school nutrition team, as well as teachers and administrators, should know how to recognize symptoms of an allergic reaction and how to respond if one should occur. Label all allergens. Clearly label any allergens included in a food product on your school menu, serving line, and on the item's packaging. This will help students with allergies avoid foods that may pose a risk to them. Clean hands, tools, and surfaces. Food service staff should be rigorous in all food safety and sanitation protocols. Treat food allergens as if they were bacteria and properly clean any tools or surfaces that come into contact with them, including countertops, serving utensils, and containers. Encourage students to wash their hands with soap and water after eating. Stocking epinephrine. All schools should have unassigned EpiPens or similar epinephrine injectors in stock and easily accessible by multiple adults in the event that a child suffers an allergic reaction. Please check with your local health department for more information on this. We want to make sure we define what a state-licensed healthcare professional is. This is an individual who is authorized to write medical prescriptions under state law. These individuals may include a physician, a physician's assistant, advanced practice registered nurse or nurse practitioner, chiropractor, or licensed medical nutrition therapist that is working with a licensed physician. This distinction is important as we discuss the medical statement form in future slides. Although we only discussed 5 different phrases, there are many other definitions you may want to look up if you have questions. Additional definitions can be found at the back of Accommodating Children with Disabilities in the School Meal Programs, Guidance for School Food Service Professionals. Now that we have reviewed some common language and terms, we can now talk about meal modification requests and forms. SFAs are to make reasonable meal accommodations for students with mental or physical impairments. What deems a reasonable meal accommodation is to be determined by the SFA. Because SFAs are encouraged to provide meal modifications, open communication is key to keeping students safe and encouraging participation in the school meals programs. The request for meal accommodation and the medical statement forms are meant to be a documented form of communication between the student, the parents or guardians, and the SFA. The request for meal accommodation form can be seen on the left, and the medical statement form can be seen on the right. We will discuss each of the forms in detail. This form is called the Request for Meal Accommodation form. This is to be completed by the student or parent and guardian when requesting modifications that fall within the program meal pattern. For example, this form could be utilized if a student has an allergy to a single fruit or vegetable, such as strawberries. In this case, the SFA would simply offer the student another fruit in place of the strawberries. To fill out the form, the student or parent and guardian will need to provide the student's information. This information includes student's name, date of birth, the name of the parent or guardian, and the school building the student attends. Several different forms of communication with the household are also requested, such as a telephone number, an address, and an email address. In the next section, it is requested that the type of dietary restrictions or modifications be described. Following that, a description of the physical or mental impairment needs to be listed. It is not required that a medical diagnosis be included, only a description is required. The bottom half of the form includes the civil rights statement that protects individuals from discrimination. The statement includes contact information for individuals to request accommodations or to file a complaint of discrimination if necessary. A few examples of discriminatory actions may include providing an individual an opportunity that is not equal to the opportunity provided to others, providing an individual services that are not as effective as the services provided to others, or denying an individual the opportunity to benefit from or participate in aid, benefits, or services granted to them. These three examples really drive home the importance of providing meal accommodations to students with specific dietary needs. As food service professionals, you want to ensure that all students have the same opportunities to eat nutritious and well-balanced meals as other students do. In the bottom right corner is a box that the SFA is to complete. The school should indicate who the form can be returned to, their phone number, the date the form is received back to the SFA, and a spot to indicate if and when the school made a follow-up with the family. It is recommended that the SFA follow up with the family at least once per year to ensure the information is up to date. By federal regulation, this form is not required if accommodations can be met within program meal pattern. However, there must be some form of documentation regarding a meal modification request. Nutrition Services strongly encourages SFAs to utilize this form as a communication tool. The second form is the medical statement form. This is to be used if meal accommodations cannot be made within the program meal pattern. An example of this might be a student's family requesting a gluten-free diet due to celiac disease. Gluten-free products are not always whole grain rich, and because of this, these meals would not fall within meal pattern, thus requiring a medical statement. The medical statement requires the same student information and contact information as the request for meal accommodation form. This form also requires a description for the physical or mental impairment and any dietary restrictions or modifications. Again, a medical diagnosis is not required to be listed. Foods to omit and foods to substitute can be listed if applicable. There is also a section to indicate if texture or thickness modifications are needed. With a medical statement on file, an SFA can be reimbursed for meal modifications outside of the program meal pattern. On this form, there is a space for the signature of a state licensed medical professional, their printed name and title, contact information, and date the document was signed. This form may also be signed by a practicing licensed medical nutrition therapist, an LMNT, along with the name of the physician they are working with. Similar to the request for a meal accommodation form, the civil rights statement is found on the bottom half of the document, and the school's information section can be found on the bottom right. Next, we will explore 504 and IEP plans. These are plans that are federal laws and offer comprehensive formal support for students with disabilities. It's important to note that some students may have a 504 plan or an IEP that includes dietary accommodations. A 504 plan generally encompasses health-related accommodations, and it may include, but isn't limited to, learning disabilities. An IEP may include the same accommodations as a 504 plan, but its primary function is to support students with learning disabilities through tailored instruction that involves providing learning strategies. As a food service director or food service staff, it is important to be aware of any students with these plans and to work with administration and families to best serve the student and their individual needs. If you have additional questions about these plans, please reach out to the state office for guidance. A key point to remember as you receive meal modification requests is that each student has their own individualized needs. With that said, each request needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you have questions about a request or need clarification, reach out to the student's parents or guardians. Open communication between the household and the SFA helps encourage participation in the school meal programs and also promotes safety of the student. The state staff is also available to help out and provide guidance as needed. Another key point, an SFA should not delay a meal modification if a medical statement is not yet on file. Modifications should be made as soon as possible in order to keep the student safe and healthy. The SFA should continually follow up the household until a medical statement is provided. Documentation is to be kept on file each time the household is contacted for follow-up on receiving said documentation. Both the requests for meal accommodation and medical statement forms can be found on NDE's website at the following links. A Spanish version of the medical statement is also available on the website. Once you receive the completed forms, how long do you keep them on file? Record retention is an important part of the school meals programs, and documenting meal modifications is no different. For those students that are currently part of your school district, keep the documentation on file for as long as the student attends your school. Be sure to make follow-up calls at least once a year to keep information up to date. For those students who are part of your school district and no longer need meal modifications, keep that documentation on file for 3 years plus the current year. This is the same time frame for any other documentation pertaining to the school meals program. As far as reimbursement goes, SFAs can claim meals for reimbursement when modifications are made within meal pattern and modifications that are made outside of meal pattern that have supporting documentation, such as the medical statement form. There is no additional reimbursement for any extra costs accrued for providing meal accommodations. Offer versus serve, or OVS, gives students more control in the foods they choose to take and eat. OVS may help reduce food waste and even encourage students to try new foods. With OVS, a student can create a reimbursable meal without taking all 5 components. In the case of meal modifications, a student cannot be asked to exclude a food component. This would not be considered a reasonable modification and could not be claimed for reimbursement. The student must still be offered all 5 components. If a student cannot have a food component being offered, the SFA is expected to offer a reasonable substitution for that component. Even if the student does not take the component offered, the option still needs to be available to them. For example, you have a student needing a gluten-free diet, and you are serving hamburger on a bun one day. The best practices would be to offer the student a gluten-free bun or equivalent to go with their hamburger. The student cannot be asked not to take a bun because a gluten-free option is not available. A gluten-free option should be available to the student every day. As previously emphasized, SFAs must take requests on a case-by-case basis because each request will be unique. That said, requests can cover a wide spectrum of scenarios. I will cover some basics of the more common requests you might receive. Another meal modification request you might receive revolves around portion sizes. An SFA may come across a meal request that would fall under or over the minimum portion sizes for the school meal program, meal pattern. Whether for smaller portions or larger portions, the request must be verified with a medical statement signed by a licensed healthcare professional. If the SFA is accommodating for larger portion sizes, the SFA will not receive additional reimbursement from the school meal program to cover extra costs. To cover these costs, the SFA may use funds from the school food service account, general fund account, or special education funds if it is specified in a student's individualized education plan or IEP. Another meal modification request an SFA might receive is to serve a specific brand name item. In this case, it would need to be verified with a medical statement in order for the SFA to provide the brand name product. It is recommended that the SFA follow up with the household to determine if the brand name product is the only product that can be served or if certain generic brands may be equivalent to the name brand items. Many times the generic brands will be sufficient. Some households may request meal accommodations based on preferences. These requests may be based on cultural, religious, or ethnic backgrounds. SFAs are not required to accommodate for meal preferences, although providing such accommodations may help participation in school meal programs. SFAs are strongly encouraged to consider making accommodations even if it is as simple as providing more information on monthly menus. The SFA may choose to indicate meals that have pork in them, indicate foods that are vegetarian, indicate foods that may contain milk, soy, or egg products, etc. The SFA can adapt the menu information depending on what the needs of the student population are. Any meal modifications made based on preference must fall within meal pattern. SFAs are responsible for any additional costs accrued from making such accommodations. No additional funding will be granted to the SFA to cover these expenses. Milk is by far the most common accommodation requested. The requests may be based on a preference or may be deemed medically necessary. Again, if the request is a cultural, religious, or ethnic preference, the SFA is not required to accommodate but are encouraged to consider the request. If the request is based on a mental or physical impairment, the SFA is expected to make the accommodation. Some cases may be accommodated within meal pattern and do not require a medical statement. A good example of this would be providing lactose-free milk for a student with a lactose intolerance. In other cases, a medical statement may be required. An example of this might be when a family is requesting almond milk be served to a student. In this case, almond milk would not be nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk and would fall outside the meal pattern. This particular request would require a medical statement signed by a licensed healthcare provider indicating that almond milk is the appropriate substitution for that particular student. With the medical statement on file, the SFA is required to provide the student almond milk. As briefly mentioned in the previous slide, milk alternates must be nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. Listed on this chart are the nutrients and their minimum amounts required in order for a milk alternate to meet the nutrient requirements. The required nutrients to be present in milk alternates are calcium, protein, vitamin A, vitamin D, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, riboflavin, which is vitamin B2, and vitamin B12. The only exception to this rule would be if a medical statement is on file indicating an alternate milk that does not meet the minimum nutrient requirements. Water and juice are never acceptable substitutions for milk. Let's take the information that we've learned so far and apply it to some realistic scenarios in the next few slides. Some of these examples have been taken and adapted from the USDA's guidance manual or policy memos. Scenario number 1. A parent calls and requests a gluten-free diet. Do you encourage the parent to complete a request for meal accommodation form or a medical statement form? This example was mentioned a little bit earlier in this presentation. In this case, you would encourage the family to complete a medical statement form. Many times, gluten-free items are not whole grain rich, and because of this, they would not fall within meal pattern. A medical statement will also allow the SFA to claim the student's meals for reimbursement. Scenario number 2. Is an SFA required to make meal modifications for food preferences rather than for a physical or mental impairment? No, SFAs are not required to provide meal modifications for preference requests, although it is strongly encouraged that the SFA consider making accommodations. Making preference modifications may help with participation in the school meal programs. Just remember that if you would choose to make the modifications based on preference, the modification must fall within the meal pattern. This answer can be found on page 15 of SP 26-2017. All right, one more scenario. A student no longer requires modified meals outside the program meal pattern. Must an SFA obtain an amended medical statement prior to ending the student's meal modification? No, an SFA would not need a new medical statement. The SFA is encouraged to follow up with the family and ensure that the student no longer needs the modification. Document this interaction on the medical statement form that you currently have and keep this information on file for 3 years plus the current year. This information will be beneficial to have on hand in case the student ever needs meal modifications again. Time to start wrapping up what we've learned today. The main points we discussed today include the following. First, providing meal accommodations are important for a student's health, safety, and participation in the school meal programs. Second, federal laws and guidance can help us determine how to accommodate for meal modification requests. Because of the new guidance, NDE Nutrition Services has created requests for meal accommodation forms and medical statement forms to help with communication between the household and the SFA. And third, there is potential for many different modifications to be requested. Most importantly, each request should be individualized to ensure the student is properly cared for. This presentation was created using the resources on the following screen. Again, I encourage you to read through the most current guidance manual. There's a lot of great meal modification information included. The guidance may even help answer some of your questions. Do you need any additional resources to help provide safe foods for all children in your school? Here are some options from reputable sources. Each source is linked if you click on the topics under the organization. If you have additional questions that have not been discussed during the session today, please contact me via phone or email. My email can also be found at the beginning of this training. You may also visit the Nutrition Services Special Diet webpage. This webpage has additional information that you may find useful in your food service operation.